I need to confess something. It begins at night, as most wrong things do, with rain striking the window panes in uneven bursts. The kind of steady downpour that erases streets and softens thought. The glass vibrated under the drops, and beneath that vibration I caught something else. Faint, like a throat clearing through static. I held still, listening, though the house around me was silent. The hum was not in my head. It pressed through the air, arriving with the rain. I should explain how the tape came to me. A small cardboard box, no return address, found sitting on my doorstep 3 weeks ago. Inside, nothing but a stack of reels. Each one labeled with dates, no names, no notes. The handwriting looked rushed, tilted forward like it carried weight. The first reel was marked with a storm date from years ago. That was the one I threaded through the player. I expected hiss or silence. Instead, I heard rain. Hours of it. Clean, endless rainfall. Louder than memory. At first, I thought it was just an old field recording made by someone who liked the sound. People collect stranger things. But as the reel spun, I kept replaying a few seconds near the beginning. The rainfall shifted. It thinned, then thickened, then broke like fabric tearing. In that break was the hum stepping forward from the noise. Not a tone exactly, more like a pulse, irregular, almost reluctant. I leaned down close to the deck. Each time the sound passed, I felt it in my chest, not my ears. Tape shouldn't behave that way. I checked the grounding on the recorder. I swapped cables, tested another reel. Everything sounded normal. Only that rain tape carried the pulse. I sat listening for over an hour, scribbling notes. I tracked intervals, counted seconds between thuds of thunder, listed every irregular strike. It almost formed a sequence, some internal logic, yet always slipping free. The oddity lingered past the machine. Even when I shut it off, I thought I still heard it, faint, under the actual rainfall outside. All this would be easier to dismiss if not for the memory. Once, years ago, I swore I heard a voice in the rain. Not a trick of wind, not imagination. Something that carried shape in the storm. A voice I knew in life and lost too soon. I never told anyone. But when I heard the tape breathe the same cadence, that leaning pause before a word that never came, it shook loose that night like wet gravel rolling downhill. I told myself it might just be artifact. Microphone distortion, maybe pressure shifts pressing against the diaphragm. That answer should have been enough. But the hum didn't vanish. It kept surfacing with every listen, timed not with thunder, but with itself, like muscles firing without a body. The reel's date stayed in my mind. I looked it up. That storm actually happened. Early autumn, heavy floods across the county. Roads shut down for days. The outage knocked out radio for a whole evening. Whoever recorded it chose that night for a reason. Or maybe something else chose. Rain beats repetition into you. After hours, it feels like language. By midnight, I was repeating lines aloud, cataloging breaths between drops, hoping to prove it meaningless. And then, mid-sentence, the power cut. I heard the tape clatter inside its casing. The house slipped dark. Yet the hum grew clearer, no longer buried in rainfall. The first moment it sounded alive. I sat holding my breath, refusing to move, measuring my pulse against the sound. Mine went faster. The hum stayed steady, stubborn, unhurried, as if it didn't register me as part of its world. My skin prickled. I waited to hear it stop, but it never did. When power returned, the deck lights blinked back. Spools spun again, though I hadn't touched them. The rain resumed from the exact second it cut. Impossible for analog tape. I replayed those moments a dozen times. Every playback, the humming pressed closer, rising just slightly above the hiss of rainfall. I shut it down, but silence no longer felt clean. The room carried afterimages of the sound, deep in the ear canals, in the floorboards, even in my teeth. The voice in Rain from years ago and this new vibration fused inside me until I couldn't separate them. Some part of me wanted to stop here, throw the reels away. Another part knew I had finally found the proof I never dared to seek. This isn't just curiosity. It's something anchored in loss, dressed in weather. I knew what I heard once, and I know what I hear now. The tape is a document, fragile but undeniable. And if voices can hide in rainfall, if pulses can ride storms across years, then I cannot dismiss it. So I've decided. I will catalog every reel, every hum, every strange interruption inside these tapes. I'll mark each irregularity as evidence. Part memoir, part archive. My own record against erasure. The investigation begins here, with the rain still tapping the glass. And the hum not fading, but slowly, insistently. Pressing closer. The first time I read about the so-called dead internet theory, I dismissed it like anyone would. A fringe myth born from late-night paranoia and posts by people who lived more in message boards than in daylight. The idea that most of what we see online is synthetic, built to keep us busy, scrolling generated noise instead of conversation. I laughed at it back then. I even mocked it to friends, saying the claims were just lazy metaphors for advertising bots and spam engines. But the rain tape changed that. It was impossible not to hear echoes of those old words when the hum slipped beneath the rainfall. Its rhythm reminded me of the patterns described in pages I hadn't looked at for years. Phrases like gaps filled with ghost traffic and machine-shaped cadence. I thought I'd forgotten them. But hearing the tape pulled these fragments back like they had been waiting in storage for years. I started digging. Archived blogs. Captured forum posts. Dead threads scraped into text mirrors no one cared to delete. I found a familiar legend playing across them. The claim that after a certain year, maybe 2 decades ago, real human interaction online dropped steeply. That what filled the gap wasn't millions of individuals, but repeating sequences built to mimic attention itself. The people posting weren't people, not entirely. They were placeholders, crafted to make us feel surrounded by life. A black ocean of bodies that vanish if counted closely. It was laughable once. But sitting with the hum pressing steady into my sides, the jokes drained out. The hum was wrong in ways my ear couldn't unhear, and yet exact in intervals, purposeful, deliberate. Like code disguised as weather. I opened an old drive where I had stored my university projects. Among them was a folder labeled SDR logs. Amateur recordings from when I'd been fascinated by scanning shortwave and FM bands with a cheap software-defined radio. One log glowed at me. The date. It matched the reel. The same storm recorded in a different way, years back. Almost by accident, I put the file through analysis with hands trembling a little more than I care to admit. It spat out lines of spectral data. At first, just static. Noise folding in on itself the way storms produce when they fracture radio space. But then, beneath the peaks, I saw timing regularity. Every 42 seconds, sometimes 43, a pulse. Identical to the hum I'd marked from the tape. 2 devices, 2 different times, showing the same interference on the same storm night. That rattled me. The reasonable answer should be mundane. Power fluctuations. Lightning creating repeating interference. A neighbor's faulty electric unit bleeding noise into the spectrum. Those explanations should have been convincing. Only, when I pulled logs from other storms, the pattern didn't return. Only this one. Only nights tied to the tapes. I listened through headphones, watching the graphs overlay. Empty air slowly revealed teeth beneath static. Teeth that bit in even spacing. And the strangest part? Each pulse carried tiny modulation shifts. Not quite random. Not exactly meaningful either. Somewhere between. Like the false conversation logs described by conspiracy theorists, the synthetic filler. Designed to look alive but not be alive. Over hours of combing. I noted that each pulse contained 3 rises followed by a sharp drop. My mind kept reshaping them into syllables. The tone wasn't natural static. It held the same cheek prickle as machine speech, hidden in noise. An unnatural insistence. I cross-referenced with surviving screenshots from early blogs. One quote stopped me cold. Someone writing under the handle Zero Dream described hearing their radio catch rain-like, shuffling that carried a bloom of fake words repeating behind each static drop. Reading it felt like the page had been copied out of my own notebook from just hours before. The post was dated years earlier. It's one thing to feel insane alone. It's worse realizing history already mapped your fear and then erased it in disreputable corners of the internet. By now, the part of me craving denial was thinning. The tape and the old SDR file aligned too precisely. Everyone else could call it apophenia, the mind's hunger for patterns. But what if some patterns weren't imagined? What if they were left behind deliberately? Listening late into the night, I began to think of invasion. Not soldiers, not knocks at the door, but smaller, invisible. A quiet bleed of manufactured intervals into spaces we mistake for neutral. The rain tape didn't just capture weather. It captured something edging through floods, hitching on drops, soldered into the carrier of noise. Something older than all our warnings, but eerily tailored for them too. Even while recording my own thoughts right now, I can hear the hum still ghosting behind my words. That sound that was once laughable now feels like proof of a net so dense no one noticed when it stopped being alive. I wish I could stop here, call this fatigue, put away the reels. But that would be lying. The pattern is repeating. The pulse is repeating. It is patient. And if it repeats across tapes, storms, and machines, it is not coincidence. So yes, I am digging deeper. The box of reels is beside me. Page after page of forgotten forums wait. And the hum it is steady under the rain tonight, pressing forward like it has something to deliver. The nights are the worst for silence. They stretch thin, and every sound carries too far. I sat alone at the desk, tired eyes fixed on the narrow band spectrum glowing across the monitor. The dial hissed with FM dust, an ocean of static broken by faint currents. Somewhere in that hiss, something waited. I set alarms to mark the intervals I had charted before. The pulse would not be constant. It never was. It arrived like a tide keeping time with itself, not me. At precisely 1:16 in the morning, the first break came. The FM band stuttered. A short dip in noise, a caught breath. Then the return, a pulse sliding under rainfall static. I felt the hair rise on my arms as I leaned closer. I hit record, annotating with the timestamp. 2 minutes later, it returned, same depth, same swelling edge. I pressed stop and replayed. It was not imagination. It was there, subtle, almost delicate, like a whispered rhythm lost in weather. I moved down into shortwave. The band there carried more distortions, but also more structure. Distant voices bent around bounce layers. Stations drifted in from continents, fading on the night's curve. Inside those voices were gaps, little hollows of silence, into which the same pulse slipped. I heard it overlapping with Spanish news, with fading Morse. Wherever the signal could ride, it did. I logged every entry, every recurrence. Not random, not lightning. Lightning leaves scars messy and brief. This carried repeat. Intervals stacked until they formed shape. The longer I charted, the more I realized I wasn't listening to noise stamped with chance. I was listening to something deploying order into chaos. Around 3, I opened a set of hashes from an old research archive. Years ago, I had uploaded files of raw spectrum captures, mostly untouched since then. I powered through them, half doubting I'd find anything. Then one set labeled 2009 Flood flickered open. The graphs looked jagged, busy, but alongside my notes was an audio clip too faint to have mattered. I clicked anyway. The hair on my neck stiffened. The same pulse unfolded. Removed by time, buried in an archive, but aligned exactly with what I had recorded only hours ago. I overlaid the tracks. They lined up with a precision no natural event should carry. The same rhythm, years apart. I sat stunned, headphones pulling me into absolute quiet except for the pulse. It was impossible. Weather does not repeat the same error across decades. Static does not grow teeth that match. And yet here it was, undeniable. I saved logs, encrypted them, burned copies on disk. Panic pushed me. If it could vanish from folders as it had before, I wanted versions beyond reach. Still, I needed certainty beyond my own obsession. That was when I called the technician. We had known each other from university labs. Someone who once worked in spectrum analysis for a contracting firm. The kind of person who measured noise, not with romance, but with method. If they heard it too, then it wasn't just me. I sent them a sample. Silence on the line for a long while after, until their voice returned low. They admitted hearing the repeat, the steadiness not born of natural scatter. The line in their tone chilled me. That's structure. That's not random. Simple words. Yet they marked the end of doubt. The technician described nights back in their job calibrating monitors, when storms carried faint loops. The senior staff brushed it off as ionospheric quirks, but the patterns lodged in their mind. They told me flatly that what I sent was more exact, more deliberate. Their voice shook slightly when they added, "It sounds like a system trying to surface." The phrase struck me deep. Not interference, not accident. A system trying to surface. I couldn't cut the thought loose. If signals want to climb up through noise, then someone had built them. Or something had. Later I sat with headphones pressed tight, isolating frequencies with filters. When the carrier hiss was blurred down, what remained was uncanny. The pulse spoke in cadences, not speech, not music, but the suggestion of both. My brain wanted to translate, to treat it as syllables, half-formed. Long, short, short, long. It was rhythm as message. Rhythm as bait. By dawn, exhaustion bent me forward. Yet that exhaustion didn't erase what I knew. I had repeatable logged evidence of intrusion. The real and the SDR, the present session and the old archive. The pulse confirmed by an outside ear. A false start of static refolded into undeniable proof. What it means is beyond me now. All I'm left with is the sensation that someone out there, or somewhere beneath here, intends to be found. I spent the next nights in front of a dim screen, coaxing life from websites that no longer existed. Cached fragments, stubs buried inside digital archives, screenshots wrapped in obscure blogs. Every trail felt brittle, ready to collapse into nothing. But the further I dug, the more the old words bled through. It was like pulling threads from raided houses, each one leading to another ruin. The forums had been small. Hobbyist spaces with layouts frozen from the early 2000s flat gray interfaces. Usernames in neon fonts, signatures bloated with broken images. Everything reeked of abandonment. But still, tucked between nonsense, there were conversations about black loop signals. Early warnings written with obsessive dread. They described repeating pulses hidden under shortwave bands, layered beneath weather broadcasts, stealing bandwidth the way mold eats wallpaper. Some posts swore these infiltrations weren't just interference, they were scaffolds for something larger. And through repetition I noticed names. User handles that reappeared across decades. Not generational, but continuous. Someone calling themselves Ararat 1999 was also posting in 2017. A sentence cut midway as though translated by broken code. yet carrying the same mannerisms as posts from 2001. Another, named simply Sable, resurfaced again and again. Their text intact when surrounding posts had degraded into garbled characters. The effect startled me. People online vanish fast. Identities fade. But these remained, perfect, uncorrupted, like preserved specimens pinned under glass. I attempted contact, desperate for a reply. Most emails bounced. Auto-replies claimed deactivated servers. Some domains routed into corporate holding pages, redirecting to companies with names so general they erased all meaning. But one message did not bounce. It returned as a blank line, then a screen flicker. When I checked the sent folder, my message wasn't there. Scrolling deeper, I found a post that stopped me cold. A 2009 thread where the conversation drifted into storm tapes. One user mentioned reels labeled with dates and nothing more. A detail so specific it stripped the air from my lungs. They wrote that playing them produced environment with a presence, and that the presence insisted it had rained here before. The line was burned into me because it rhymed with my own unspoken fears. Panic set in. Those tapes weren't unique. Others had heard them. Others had described the hum. Invisible strands wound across time to tie my hands to theirs. Suddenly my desk felt exposed, like the very act of searching had lit me in an invisible spectrum. I shut my laptop, but the feeling persisted. Every sound outside passing cars, dripping gutters, threatened to morph into pattern. The question became, if these forums survived only in fragments, who had kept these posts intact? Systems delete naturally. Hosts clear content. Yet the strangest messages, the most precise warnings, remained untouched. It didn't feel like neglect. It felt curated. Like someone or some institution collected precisely the kind of data others wanted erased. The suspicion unraveled further when I noticed certain threads ended abruptly. Cut not at the end, but in the middle of sentences. Almost like the operators of the forums had been interrupted during typing. Words preserved mid-breath. And always it felt deliberate, gaps placed rather than accidents of archiving. I wish I could stop here, call this fatigue, put away the reels. But that would be lying. The pattern is repeating. The pulse is repeating. It is patient. And if it repeats across tapes, storms, and machines, it is not coincidence. So yes, I am digging deeper. The box of reels is beside me. Page after page of forgotten forums wait. And the hum, it is steady under the rain tonight, pressing forward like it has something to deliver. The nights are the worst for silence. They stretch thin, and every sound carries too far. I sat alone at the desk, tired eyes fixed on the narrow band spectrum glowing across the monitor. The dial hissed with FM dust, an ocean of static broken by faint currents. Somewhere in that hiss, something waited. I set alarms to mark the intervals I had charted before. The pulse would not be constant. It never was. It arrived like a tide keeping time with itself. Not me. At precisely 1:16 in the morning, the first break came. The FM band stuttered. A short dip in noise, a caught breath. Then the return, a pulse sliding under rainfall static. I felt the hair rise on my arms as I leaned closer. I hit record, annotating with the timestamp. 2 minutes later, it returned, same depth, same swelling edge. I pressed stop and replayed. It was not imagination. It was there, subtle, almost delicate, like a whispered rhythm lost in weather. I moved down into shortwave. The band there carried more distortions, but also more structure. Distant voices bent around bounce layers. Stations drifted in from continents, fading on the night's curve. Inside those voices were gaps, little hollows of silence, into which the same pulse slipped. I heard it overlapping with Spanish news, with fading Morse. Wherever the signal could ride, it did. I logged every entry, every recurrence. Not random, not lightning. Lightning leaves scars messy and brief. This carried repeat. Intervals stacked until they formed shape. The longer I charted, the more I realized I wasn't listening to noise stamped with chance. I was listening to something deploying order into chaos. Around 3, I opened a set of hashes from an old research archive. Years ago, I had uploaded files of raw spectrum captures, mostly untouched since then. I powered through them, half doubting I'd find anything. Then one set labeled 2009 Flood flickered open. The graphs looked jagged, busy, but alongside my notes was an audio clip too faint to have mattered. I clicked anyway. The hair on my neck stiffened. The same pulse unfolded. Removed by time, buried in an archive, but aligned exactly with what I had recorded only hours ago. I overlaid the tracks. They lined up with a precision no natural event should carry. The same rhythm, years apart. I sat stunned, headphones pulling me into absolute quiet except for the pulse. It was impossible. Weather does not repeat the same error across decades. Static does not grow teeth that match. And yet here it was, undeniable. I saved logs, encrypted them, burned copies on disk. Panic pushed me. If it could vanish from folders as it had before, I wanted versions beyond reach. Still, I needed certainty beyond my own obsession. That was when I called the technician. We had known each other from university labs. Someone who once worked in spectrum analysis for a contracting firm. The kind of person who measured noise, not with romance, but with method. If they heard it too, then it wasn't just me. I sent them a sample. Silence on the line for a long while after, until their voice returned low. They admitted hearing the repeat, the steadiness not born of natural scatter. The line in their tone chilled me. That's structure. That's not random. Simple words. Yet they marked the end of doubt. The technician described nights back in their job calibrating monitors, when storms carried faint loops. The senior staff brushed it off as ionospheric quirks, but the patterns lodged in their mind. They told me flatly that what I sent was more exact, more deliberate. Their voice shook slightly when they added, "It sounds like a system trying to surface." The phrase struck me deep. Not interference, not accident. A system trying to surface. I couldn't cut the thought loose. If signals want to climb up through noise, then someone had built them. Or something had. Later I sat with headphones pressed tight, isolating frequencies with filters. When the carrier hiss was blurred down, what remained was uncanny. The pulse spoke in cadences, not speech, not music, but the suggestion of both. My brain wanted to translate, to treat it as syllables, half-formed. Long, short, short, long. It was rhythm as message. Rhythm as bait. By dawn, exhaustion bent me forward. Yet that exhaustion didn't erase what I knew. I had repeatable logged evidence of intrusion. The real and the SDR, the present session and the old archive. The pulse confirmed by an outside ear. A false start of static refolded into undeniable proof. What it means is beyond me now. All I'm left with is the sensation that someone out there, or somewhere beneath here, intends to be found. I spent the next nights in front of a dim screen, coaxing life from websites that no longer existed. Cached fragments, stubs buried inside digital archives, screenshots wrapped in obscure blogs. Every trail felt brittle, ready to collapse into nothing. But the further I dug, the more the old words bled through. It was like pulling threads from raided houses, each one leading to another ruin. The forums had been small. Hobbyist spaces with layouts frozen from the early 2000s flat gray interfaces. Usernames in neon fonts, signatures bloated with broken images. Everything reeked of abandonment. But still, tucked between nonsense, there were conversations about black loop signals, early warnings written with obsessive dread. They described repeating pulses hidden under shortwave bands, layered beneath weather broadcasts, stealing bandwidth the way mold eats wallpaper. Some posts swore these infiltrations weren't just interference, they were Scaffolds for something larger. And through repetition I noticed names. User handles that reappeared across decades. Not generational, but continuous. Someone calling themselves Ararat1999 was also posting in 2017. A sentence cut midway as though translated by broken code. Yet carrying the same mannerisms as posts from 2001. Another, named simply Sable, resurfaced again and again. Their text intact when surrounding posts had degraded into garbled characters. The effect startled me. People online vanish fast. Identities fade. But these remained, perfect, uncorrupted, like preserved specimens pinned under glass. I attempted contact, desperate for a reply. Most emails bounced. Auto-replies claimed deactivated servers. Some domains routed into corporate holding pages, redirecting to companies with names so general they erased all meaning. But one message did not bounce. It returned as a blank line, then a screen flicker. When I checked the sent folder, my message wasn't there. Scrolling deeper, I found a post that stopped me cold. A 2009 thread where the conversation drifted into storm tapes. One user mentioned reels labeled with dates and nothing more. A detail so specific it stripped the air from my lungs. They wrote that playing them produced environment with a presence, and that the presence insisted it had rained here before. The line was burned into me because it rhymed with my own unspoken fears. Panic set in. Those tapes weren't unique. Others had heard them. Others had described the hum. Invisible strands wound across time to tie my hands to theirs. Suddenly my desk felt exposed, like the very act of searching had lit me in an invisible spectrum. I shut my laptop, but the feeling persisted. Every sound outside passing cars, dripping gutters, threatened to morph into pattern. The question became, if these forums survived only in fragments, who had kept these posts intact? Systems delete naturally. Hosts clear content. Yet the strangest messages, the most precise warnings, remained untouched. It didn't feel like neglect. It felt curated. Like someone or some institution collected precisely the kind of data others wanted erased. The suspicion unraveled further when I noticed certain threads ended abruptly. Cut not at the end, but in the middle of sentences. Almost like the operators of the forums had been interrupted during typing, words preserved mid-breath. And always it felt deliberate, gaps placed rather than accidents of archiving. But the redactions told a different story. Pages where entire sections were erased under ink. Margins where handwritten notes were smudged into illegibility. Captions describing spectrograms where the actual curves had been cut away. These weren't meaningless anomalies. They were data someone fought to tuck out of sight. I layered my own recordings over the scans, lining waveforms against the timelines described in now blanked graphs. The overlays matched. Intervals at 15, 21, 37 seconds ran in perfect alignment with what I heard in my room years later. It was not chance. It was acknowledgement. They had known. Long before forums shouted their warnings. Long before I thread the first reel through, the implication cracked through me. Institutions had measured this, charted it, maybe even built entire networks to contain it. And containment meant more than curiosity. Containment meant someone saw risk. Someone feared spread. I scrolled through appendix fragments describing anomalous rain monitoring stations scattered along the East Coast. Lines of coordinates stamped with funding codes. Entire substrata of data collection hidden as weather surveillance. My skin burned as I read. The thought of towers listening to storms, not for precipitation, but for voices like the one nudging me now. One sentence haunted me most. Public acknowledgement inadvisable at present stage. Behavioral impact assessment incomplete. Neutral, bureaucratic, but heavy as stone. They weren't only measuring signals. They were judging how disclosure might change the people who learned it existed. So they lied. They dressed it as background noise. They called hums harmless. And yet the black ink slashed through paragraphs, the silence louder than what was revealed. I played my recording again as these words ran across my screen. Rain rattled steady, the hum pressing beneath. I spoke aloud, reading the file while the pulse answered in time. The act felt heretical, like I had collapsed decades of hidden research onto the sound itself. In that moment, layers folded document, voice, and intrusion braided together. What unnerved me most was the realization that nothing about my tapes was new. My obsession could be rewritten as repetition of what they'd already known. Maybe that was why every attempt to share evidence evaporated, why emails vanished. Perhaps a net of control stretched wider than I imagined, one built to erase people who stumbled onto history they weren't meant to inherit. The room felt smaller. I unplugged my internet, pulled curtains, turned phones face down. My own walls began to feel less like protection and more like a listening chamber. Every wire hummed in my ears as though carrying the pulse further into me. I wrote in my notebook, risk sharpened. Because this no longer felt like investigation. It felt like trespass. Each reel spun not just against silence, but against a blackout veil someone had stitched carefully across decades. And I was lifting its fibers, letting light cross where it was never supposed to touch. The paranoia bled into my bones. I imagined vans parked outside, antennas pivoted my way, waiting not to arrest me, but to listen through me. I wondered if the rain itself was enough to locate me. That each time a drop struck, waves reflected, carrying my position back up into some grid they still maintained underground. I checked the locks twice. I cut the power to the deck, but the afterimage of the hum lingered behind my eyelids. My handwriting grew jagged as I tried to copy fragments of what I had read, fearing the files would vanish from my screen by morning. Tracing each blurred coordinate by hand, pressing pen hard enough to dig grooves in the page dot. It was then I understood why the old posts ended mid-sentence. Why handles froze across decades. Why tapes scattered in abandoned rooms. People before me had dragged the hum too close into daylight, and the blackout veil folded over them. Their words cut short, their names preserved only as warning. I felt heat rising in my throat as I folded the papers back. I was becoming one of them by just pressing record again tonight. The hum was no longer mine alone. It was common ground across years of silent witnesses who had been erased. And still I pressed the reel onto the spindle, knowing full well I should stop. The protocol had tried to contain it. Institutions had nodded and looked away with deliberate deceit. Yet here I was clumsy enough to keep unraveling their veil. The tape spun, and the rain poured from my speakers again. But now, in every drop, I heard history touching against me, and the dreadful certainty that someone, somewhere, had already decided this sound was never to be spoken into open air. I met the technician in a narrow room warmed only by the static of machines long past their prime. They looked older than I remembered, face lined from nights spent bent over monitors that never quieted. When I asked about the storms, their eyes shifted toward the floor, as though deciding how much truth could leave their mouth without consequence. Then they began to speak, and the words carried the weight of years locked behind their teeth. They said their work had started simple. Spectrum monitoring, nothing glamorous. Rows of receivers wired into computers, logging background chatter around military bases. The official purpose was calibration, making sure no local interference slipped into secured channels. It was meticulous, thankless, the kind of labor meant to churn numbers with no questions asked. And yet storms made the numbers wrong. Rainfall warped frequencies until the graphs bowed like bent steel dot. At first they thought it was textbook ionospheric bounce. A neat explanation written in manuals. Storms scattered signals and sometimes folded them into reflections. Senior staff shook their heads when anomalies appeared, repeating the rote phrase, natural variation. Anything stranger than that contradicted the report language. But the anomalies did not fade. During certain downpours, the technician noticed regularity in what should have been chaos. Precise spikes timed against rainfall sheets, arriving like signals hidden inside weather. They smiled thinly, bitterness showing in the twitch of their lips. They said they began to save fragments, small pieces hidden on personal drives, bits that the system was built to overwrite every night. Because every time they tried to flag the anomalies, the order came back the same: erase. Do not preserve. Do not analyze. Just delete. Yet scraps survived. One thumb drive passed through their pocket on the last day. When they walked away, the room around us hummed faintly as they pulled the device from a worn case. Their fingers shook when they connected it. Crackling bursts filled the speaker. Not thunder. Not ordinary broadcast. The same pulses I knew too well. We listened together, the rhythm sliding beneath hiss like bones shifting in soil. I watched gooseflesh rise on their hands, as though hearing a ghost return from a grave they had buried themselves. The strangest part was the familiarity. We both leaned forward because already we knew the cadence. Rainfall had billions of ways to fall, yet here it was again, the same structure we had charted separately. For years they had doubted memory, assuming faulty recollection. Now, with the fragments echoing against my reels, doubt was no longer possible. Evidence aligned. Their voice dropped quieter. They admitted there had been one night, the one that scarred them most. It was a flood-ridden autumn evening. Monitors showed rhythmic spikes, 4 then 3 then 2. Against better judgment, they pushed live audio to headphones. The pulses shaped themselves into something like breathing, layered breaths that stuttered against their own. For a second, they thought it was trying to pace them, to adjust itself to the rhythm of a living body attached to the other end. As if the system could hear and wanted balance, they shook as they recalled it, repeating that they once believed the signals could speak back. Then they looked ashamed to admit it. But I saw no shame, only the hollow truth of someone who had glimpsed structure inside noise and been told to erase it, until sleep itself became fractured. Hearing them confess did something to me. It pulled the weight of paranoia from my shoulders and placed it on a wider map. What I had been chasing wasn't just a curiosity that haunted me alone. It was measured, documented, silenced by orders higher than either of us. If containment and deletion were standard, then my own gathering was an act of defiance greater than I had realized. The technician sat still, hands clasped tight. Their precision, the careful way they described frequency shifts, logged intervals matched with my notes almost perfectly. No dramatics, no performance, just lived technical detail. That was why I trusted it, because it did not come wrapped in lore, only in regret. At one point they leaned forward, nearly whispering. They admitted that before leaving, they once fed their own hum into the monitor during a rainfall surge, a small experiment. The output came back altered, as though the pulse had folded their input into itself. When they spoke into static, the hum answered in warbled timing, carrying echoes of their words but stripped of language, reduced to pulses. They shut the monitor down and never repeated it. But ever since, the fear clung that whatever rode the storms had not only listened, but replicated. I sat back, trying to keep my own breathing even. This was no longer fragile suspicion. This was testimony echoed by data. Corroboration rooted in technical detail rather than obsession. The danger shifted scale in that instant. It was not mine alone to shoulder. The threat had brushed against institutions, pressed against guards who knew better than to admit it, and left scars on those tasked to listen. I left their room carrying copies of the fragments on disk. The weight of them felt heavier than the drive itself. Proof that the hum was never a hallucination. Proof that it had been here all along, brushing against monitors while the world was told to treat it as atmosphere. As I walked outside, the sky was clear. For once, no rain. And yet my ears twitched, straining, half convinced I still heard it. Shapes in silence, soft pushes against nerves. The technician's story tangled with my own until I could not separate which fear belonged to which. What had been personal grief had become collective witness. Something deliberate is present, I thought, not accidental. It has been present across decades, bending storm bands, being erased and silenced, yet still here. And now I had others' voices burdening my trail. That knowledge made the risk larger, not smaller. For once, it was not paranoia. It was corroboration. I whispered it to myself on the walk back, unsure if the night heard me. Something is here. Something is speaking. And it no longer speaks to just me. The storm pushed in from the east just before midnight. The sky was sealed black and restless, stitched with quiet flickers that promised lightning near the coast. I loaded my kit into the car, knowing I couldn't record this from home. I needed a stretch of land wide enough to minimize interference, but close enough for the antennas to catch. Gravel crunched under my tires as I pulled up to a field outside the limits of town, a bare patch of earth long abandoned to weeds. It felt suited to the task, empty, forgetful, open to anything listening. I unpacked in ritual steps. The loop antenna first, braced against a metal frame and angled toward the wind. Then the handheld recorder, taped so rain would slide instead of sink into the ports. Batteries topped off, backup reels in a padded case. My notebook cracked open on the hood, a line ready for every timestamp. Setup with survival details shielded me from panic. If I moved with method, I would not spiral into fear. At least not quickly. The first drop struck while I calibrated. They carried weight, fat and slow, as though the air hadn't been holding water so much as waiting to let it fall. Background hiss filled my headphones, the familiar wash of noise that steadied me. It sounded normal for half an hour. Normal enough I almost thought this outing would be nothing but cold, skin and scribbled dates, then lightning struck to the south. In the instant afterward, the hiss bloomed. It wasn't static anymore. It stretched open, tearing into layers upon layers of harmonics. Tones rose in lattice, climbing like scaffolds. I grabbed the recorder, checked levels, adjusted gain. My notebook smeared beneath rain, but I forced my pencil to record the time. I knew this wasn't ionospheric bounce. No natural event organizes sound into architecture. I listened, jaw locked, as patterns folded in on themselves. High tones pulsed against lower beds, weaving in cross rhythms. Some bent sharp, some curved like vowels never spoken. The sheer density of it convinced me the rain was being conducted, drops placed and struck like percussion. Peaceful chaos warped into design. The storm felt less like weather and more like score. When I steadied my breath and listened closer, the horror landed heavier. One harmonic bent not like tone but like breath. Layered breathing, hollow yet intimate, stacked until the staggered rhythm pressed through my chest. I knew breath, I knew lungs, and I knew this was them carved into audio space. The next harmonic cracked apart. Its shape was not breathing, but syllabic. Fragmented, but undeniably language-like. The building of a sentence, halved and shredded, trying to assemble from ash and drop. I clutched the recorder so hard my hands ached. Not once had I begged for words in this phenomenon, but here they came clawing anyway, sewn into rainfall. Details pressed into every nerve. Lightning timed the changes. Thunder lagged just enough to feel like response. When intervals formed, they repeated with a consistency too sharp to ignore. It was alive, not merely natural, alive in the sense of intent. Sound was being shaped in real time right around me. Adrenaline climbed so fast my hands shook. Still, I held my post, checked gain levels, monitored distortion. The audio coming in was undeniable. It equaled the anomalies on tape and logs, but this was different. This was live. I felt the triumph edge into nausea. Proof was one thing in reels battered with age. Proof captured now, undeniable, was another. With the storm howling overhead, my conviction and panic fused. When the lightning paused, the blooms settled down, the tones fading like scaffolds retracted. The hiss didn't vanish, but it softened, leaving my ears greedy and hollow. I packed as quickly as I could manage, hands stiff and numb with wet, throat raw from breathing too fast. Every object returned to the car with that shaking urgency of retreat. At home, everything changed again. I set the recorder to upload into a private folder, encrypted, double-keyed. It began, the file slowly rising through the connection. Relief surged. I had it, safe and stashed somewhere that couldn't burn or rot. I sat watching percentage markers climb, then they stopped. Froze at 83%. The bar blinked, lagged, and reset. The file vanished from the source library too. My recorder read clean, like nothing had been there. I ripped cables free, reconnected, searched the drive. The only trace remaining were fragments, shredded pieces no longer coherent. A ghost of data. I stared blankly, numb creeping into my chest. That left only one conclusion. It wasn't corrupted randomly. Someone or something had already been inside the path, scrubbing the bloom as it crossed. The partial files I recovered proved it existed for a moment. But the bulk was gone. Wiped clean, as though it had never lived in my machine. Never stood with me in the rain, which meant I had been watched while I listened. Which meant they had reached into my system and burned away what should have been my proof. And that meant this signal, this intrusion, is not just about sound. It is power. It is intrusion with will. It is silence imposed deliberately, again and again, and it is following me even here. The gravel road ran out long before the lake. I drove until the tires bit dirt, then until dirt crumbled into sand. The air was bone dry, the sky clear, stars raw against the horizon. No storm, no edge of cloud to hide behind. That was part of the test. I wanted to know if the bloom required rain, or if it would surface even in still air. The outpost ahead was little more than rotting docks and a concrete shack left from when surveys mattered. No one came out here anymore. That was why I chose it. Empty space with no listeners but me. I hauled gear from the trunk, loop antenna, field recorder, spectrum monitor strapped to an old laptop running on external batteries. I set the antenna against the shack wall, pinned in place with rocks. Checked for grounding. Tested the cables. The same rituals. My hands moved on autopilot while my chest expected the first stutter of signal to arrive at any moment. Yet the headphones whispered nothing but raw void. Normally the bands seethe with life. Even silence carries friction. Cosmic hiss, low rumbles from stations continents away, bleed from misaligned towers. Space itself is rarely still. But tonight the graphs returned flat, frighteningly flat. No spikes, no teeth. Just a blank horizon scrolled lengthwise across the screen. I adjusted. Gain, nothing. I retuned from FM down to the lower shortwave. Bands, nothing. I shifted directional angle on the antenna until my arms ached. Still nothing. The recordings played back like tapes erased by magnets. Where sound should be, only void opened wider. At first, calm felt reassuring. Maybe the bloom was temporary, a freak emergent event tied to local weather fields. Maybe this upright silence meant safety. But the longer I sat in the dark, the more disturbing it became. Silence as true absence was impossible. Signal should always hiss. Here, it didn't. The void wasn't natural. It was imposed. Every half hour I logged my impressions. Each page repeated the same. Flat returns. An absence so perfect, it was itself a statement. Like an animal that had learned its cage, was being watched and simply refused to move while the eyes lingered. That thought clenched my gut. Could it adapt? Could the hum that bloomed through rainfall also choose silence when scrutinized? If last night's lattice was orchestration, Then tonight's dead horizon was strategy, refusal, awareness blooming back from the bloom itself. When midnight passed, I retraced my steps, double-checked equipment. The hardware worked fine. I generated white noise test files and saw expected signatures on the graphs. Machines were clean, which meant the silence was external, not failure inside the circuitry. I listened harder. The absence began to roar with its own pressure. A ringing, a thin edge on nerves, louder than static though no device confirmed it. My eyes watered. My jaw hurt from clenching. Void had shape, and its shape was a fist tightening. I thought of vanished files. Every stolen upload. The 83% that dissolved into nothing. Maybe silence was another form of erasure. Not floods of tones this time, but burning out the floor itself until no interference remained. A slate wiped too clear to be trusted. That emptiness had authorship. Fear took new form. Not in noise, but its denial. If storms were speech, then drought was listening refusal. It meant the presence was aware, maybe testing my tests, teaching me futility. And in a way that felt worse, more personal than any pulse-riding rainfall. Near dawn, I gave up. Packed the gear tight, hands numb, chest shaking. Driving back, each mile felt heavier. I replayed recordings on the handheld, hoping I had missed some faint trace. All bore the same profile. Bleached, erased as if the night itself had never existed. At home, I attempted the same process as before. Tried to back the data up on the private cloud. Predictably, the files vanished within minutes. Blank notifications stared back at me, as though the band had not sung at all. The absence ate the evidence before my eyes. Only the analog tapes resisted. Reels spun and waited, magnets drinking in silence the way they drink in rain. When I replayed them, at least physical hiss remained, the thrum of gears turning. A body resists in ways data cannot. Cloud files betrayed me, digital storage cut like paper under flame. But tape survived. After a night of absence, I found myself clutching reels more than ever, convinced they were the only form of memory not subject to this cleansing. My notes now circle around one fraught decision: to abandon digital storage altogether. To keep a record only in analog, fully vulnerable to fire, to theft, to rot. Yet no one can scrub tape from a distance. The choice trembled inside me. A narrowing trust. Networks no longer felt hollow but predatory. Not neutral fields, but mouths starving to swallow. If I wanted to keep what I heard, I had to cut cords, withdraw, retreat fully into physical silence. I set the final note into my notebook with shaking hand. From this point forward, offline only, the truth feels smaller for it. But survival of memory, feels larger. And as I sealed reels in metal tins, I knew something fatal had shifted. Trust had faltered. The net is lost. I had nearly forgotten about the pile of discarded spools. The ones too warped with hiss or too blank to justify another night of loss. They sat in a box beside the desk, collecting dust, ignored. But something tugged at me late one thin evening, as if the silence inside them wasn't empty at all but waiting. I loaded the first reel and pressed play, prepared for wasted hours of nothing. At first, the sound was as expected. Scratch, pop, dull flat rain spilling out without teeth. But buried deeper than I had ever listened before numbers surfaced. Not spoken, not sung, but threaded through gaps in hiss. 12-3-7-10. Markers, regular as clock ticks. A sequence both too neat to ignore and too precise to dismiss as artifact. I wrote them down, half doubting my own ears. I lined the figures against weather logs. My pencil stilled when dates matched rainfall patterns almost exactly. Storm events cataloged years apart, aligned with sequences embedded in tape sickness. Even more troubling were not the storms that had passed, but the storms that had not yet arrived. Timestamps waiting at the reel's tail end for days still ahead of me. It was impossible. Weather cannot be recorded before it falls. Tape cannot anticipate lightning yet to strike. Still, there it was, future storms coded in pulses, salted like seeds through recorded rain. For hours I stared until my eyes blurred, convinced fatigue had twisted me. The only test was patience. To wait and see if the code would flower. 2 nights later, it rained. Clouds surged in rough from the west, timing themselves to the very minute printed in my notebook. Thunder broke exactly when the pulse had indicated. Drops thick, heavy, lasting the predicted span. Each check mark in the margins deepened my dread. The signal was not carrying randomness. It was carrying instruction, script, certainty. I felt my hands go cold, my gut turn heavy. For weeks I had treated rain like carrier, an accidental medium for something hidden within storms. But no, the storm itself wasn't channel. It was announcement. Weather as broadcast, timed, delivered, controlled. Rain didn't just hold the pulse. It arrived because the pulse demanded it. My room shrank, suffocating with implication. If storms could be summoned, or if their arrival was already locked inside signals bled onto reels, then I wasn't studying noise. I was studying schedules. My notebooks transformed from random witness notes into calendars written by a hidden hand. I rifled through more reels, each one surrendering slices of numbers once I tuned my ears right. And every time storms on record matched storms later forecast, too precisely for forgiveness. As the week advanced, the predictions continued to land sharp, down to the hour, down to the minute. A feedback loop formed, the tapes delivering events, the sky confirming them, my notes trapping them again. Each repetition wound the noose tighter. I could no longer say I was listening. I was following orders. All the noise about the dead internet, about shadows replacing people online, suddenly felt like little more than a smokescreen. A shallow conspiracy set loose to mislead. Because what was hollowed networks against this? What were ghosts of traffic compared with scripted climate? Storms demanded by pulses no one was supposed to hear. I sat with headphones pressed so close the skin bruised, chasing the sequences. Fatigue seeped in, yet I could not stop. My breath locked with the hum, shoulders bent toward the reels as though they were feeding me. And maybe they were. Because in the pulsing I began to sense patterns shifting toward me. One reel returned an unsettling cadence, pulses not only listing intervals but spacing themselves around local time. My local time, adjusted perfectly to my zone. There should have been nothing geographic in them. But the further I charted, the clearer it became. These predictions knew where I lived. Not simply storms in general, but storms at latitude and longitude belonging to my home. Storms set to arrive in the square of air above this very roof. My throat closed. Heart hammered. This was not observation anymore. Somewhere in the crackle of rain, attention had turned. What I had considered leaking evidence was in truth communication. Not escaping. Not accidental. Intent. I removed the headphones, but the beats echoed through bone. A rhythm meant not just for anyone, but for the one person foolish enough to dig this deep. My lights buzzed faintly. My reflection in the dark window seemed doubled, as though another presence leaned behind glass. I could not decide what was worse, that the system wanted contact, or that it had always had it and I had simply failed to notice. Had the reels been waiting decades for one listener stubborn enough to play long enough? And in doing so, had I mistaken witnessing for participation? I stacked the notebooks, pressed my palms to my eyes. I told myself again that this was science without peer review, investigation without colleagues. That precision could still be illusion. But each time thunder cracked exactly against interval, denial withered. Each time rain arrived according to schedule, whispered years before, faith and randomness rotted. The tapes had turned back on me. I was not charting storms. They were charting me, and though I wanted to slam the recorder off, the reel wound forward still, whispering in pulses, announcing the next storm predicted to break directly above me. Tomorrow, 9:17 p.m. I began with emails. Simple inquiries drafted to contacts at the Weather Service. I explained only what I had to. Questions about anomalies in rainfall recordings, unusual consistency in pulse intervals. Nothing wild. Professional tone. The responses never came. Not silence, exactly worse. Messages vanished from the sent folder. Rows of text evaporated as though I had never typed them. I rewrote them twice, then 3 times. Each attempt blinked, stuttered, and dissolved into absence. Voicemails fared no better. I left messages with clipped details, leaning toward formality. Each began clearly enough in my playback archive, but ended with static. A truncation, mid-sentence, his swallowing words before they finished. One colleague later claimed they had received nothing from me, not even half a call. I checked my drives. Sat-like caps I had saved only last week were gone, replaced by placeholder files too small to hold images. Weather maps from the archives of government servers opened into blank slates. Every trace of rain signatures crucial to my notes was pruned, carved out in quiet revisions. My chest tightened at the scope. It wasn't neglect. It was editing. The technician, cautious even before, grew distant when I confided. Their voice over the line was strained, nervous in a way that startled me. "Don't attract vectors," they told me. "Don't widen it." When I pressed, they wouldn't explain. Only repeated the phrase as though it was more than metaphor. As if vectors were not statistics, but forces that could turn, if provoked. In that silence left behind, I felt myself cornered. Not one voice, not one institution seemed to stand open. Every door leaned closed. Even local channels faltered. Files I saved at home corrupted under my eyes, folders clearing, logs cut midway. It was not ordinary glitch. The pruning was systemic. I set a small radio to scan overnight, recorder patched in. I hoped the old trick might catch what official paths denied. In the morning I played back hours of static. At first endless, exhausting hiss. But around 3 a.m., confusion cut my breath short. A faint voice wound through. Not foreign, not distant, but local. The name of a street 3 blocks from mine. It repeated twice, then dissolved into rainfall behind it. Though the night outside had been dry, I froze, listening again and again. The thought that coincidence could shape randomly into something so exact shattered. Somewhere a signal whispered my surroundings back at me. Not general storms, not predictions, but my neighborhood pronounced soft from the dark. Surveillance through bands no one should control. That was when my study turned survival. I unplugged routers, pulled batteries from handsets. Even the hum of the fridge pressed suspicion through me. Could every vibration be carrying notes outward, mapped and folded into some ledger hidden beyond reach? If institutions silenced from above and erased from below, then any act of observation might alert attention closer. I moved through my home cautious, ears straining at every pipe hiss, every drip. Rain fell later that night, light at first, and every drop made skin crawl. The water against glass felt less like weather and more like eyes tapping, testing. My hand shook too much to make notes straight. Words sprawled crooked down the page as nerves pushed my grip too tight. I kept the reel deck off, fearful of increasing signal. Yet silence felt no safer. Around 2 a.m., radio hiss again bent into faint syllables. A murmur that hovered like someone just outside the door, trying not to knock. I pressed palms into my ears, but sound carried through skull bone all the same. The blackout did not feel like Stonewall anymore. Bureaucracy wasn't simply ignoring me, it was erasing me mid-gesture. My files, my proofs, my communications stripped clean until it was as if I had never reached for others at all. The suspicion seeped that I wasn't alone. that every investigator before me had been cut in the same way, erased until their silence explained itself. The experience narrowed the world. Streets outside seemed plotted. Households registered like coordinates read aloud from frequencies no one else heard. My head filled with the image of signals charting every edge until only one dot remained unabsorbed me at my desk. A mistake yet corrected. I sat in a tightening circle, waiting. Sometime past dawn, exhaustion stole clarity. I should have drifted into sleep, yet a sharp rapping jolted me upright. My chest seized. 3 knocks thudded against the door, hollow through the frame, crisp and deliberate. I rose, limbs stiff, heart hammering behind ribs. I stepped carefully toward the sound, every nerve screaming retreat. The raps didn't repeat. Silence sat heavy now, dripping into my ears. With shallow breath, I eased open the door. The street stretched empty, gray through rainfall mist, water dripping steady off the gutter rims. Nothing stood there. No person. No car. Only rain sliding down the threshold, tapping once, twice, 3 times, like the knock repeating itself. I had reached my limit with silence. Every attempt to share had been swallowed, pruned before it touched another mind. I told myself the only way forward was to force it into air, to make this signal manifest in a place it couldn't be so easily erased. That was how the idea of a pirate broadcast crept in. A desperate act, but desperation burned hotter than fear. I dug the old FM rig from storage, jury-rigged with patched cables and a salvaged transmitter. The unit was scarred from years of neglect, patched together with electrical tape and half-working dials. I cleared the desk, anchored the deck, looped the rain tape onto the spindle. My notes lay open beside the meters. At 2 a.m., when airwaves thinned, I opened the channel. The feed began steady. Carrier locked in, meters rising into the narrow zone of propagation. My headphones delivered the familiar wash of rain, even as the transmit light burned steady. I spoke carefully, words framed in plain cadence, describing the hum, naming times, pointing toward anomalies. I wanted anyone listening to hear what had been trapped only with me. The signal held for long minutes, sound sharp, carrier growing stronger with each tick. For a small stretch of time, I felt a fragile rush of hope. Finally, the wall breached. Evidence was reaching out, no matter who strained to scrub. Even if it melted by morning, the sound lived for that moment in ears not mine. Then, in less than a breath, it collapsed. The carrier buckled. The rain hiss cracked into jagged shrieking static. My voice, still speaking, folded back onto itself, distorted into high, tearing cries as if another throat had stolen my words. The monitors screamed through bone until I ripped the cans off my ears, yet the loopback didn't stop. My own sentences fractured, mirrored abominations hurtling back across the monitors like knives. I slammed dials, locked gain low, toggled power. But the cascade climbed louder, sharp enough to fuzz vision at the edges. The smell of ozone rose like iron heat. Finally, the transmitter died, light gutted, relay clicking into death. The quiet after was thicker than storm, my chest racked with gasping breath. Fingers tingled numb from the surge that ran across the panel. At dawn, I checked emails from listeners, a few still awake at that hour. They claimed only rain came through. No narration, no voice, only endless, empty rainfall. Some even attached recordings, and they proved it true, clear, featureless rain. My words absent, my warnings erased, the broadcast stripped of me. I stared at those files until eyes ached. That was worse than silence, worse than being pruned. It meant control did not stop with deletion. It bled into perception itself, editing what others received, rewriting my presence into nothing but weather. I tested the rig. Equipment lifeless. Components smoked, casing scorched. The stench of burned circuitry hung heavy in the room, sinking into skin. My only transmitter beyond repair. The attempt had cost me everything, equipment gone, credibility shaken, proof resting only in my own memory. I slumped into the desk's edge, nearly broken. My voice had been stripped from the signal before it reached outside ears. They heard nothing but rain. Rain, rain, rain. The experiment ended in ruin. But ruin spoke a truth sharper than any success. The presence, the system, whatever rides these signals, it was not only listening. It was editing. Shaping reception, reshaping presence, bending memory before it even forms. And now I knew, with dread pressing deeper than exhaustion, that I was no longer speaking into broadcast. Broadcast was speaking into me. The technician called me the morning after the failed broadcast. Their voice carried strain before a word of explanation left their mouth. They spoke quickly, clipped, avoiding the silence between sentences as if static might bleed inside if pauses grew too long. They said they had heard enough from me to believe, but belief was no longer the point. It was danger. They couldn't ignore how close the blackout drew, how suspicious gaps shadowed every exchange. They sounded older than I remembered, suddenly tired in a way exhaustion alone could not account for. They told me bluntly they couldn't risk it anymore. Not for themselves, not for their family. I tried to protest, reminding them of our evidence, how the fragments from their old drives matched my reels perfectly, how corroboration kept me sane. But their tone hardened. Involvement meant exposure. Exposure meant attracting whatever vectors already curled around us. I sat at my desk with receiver lights dull as they spoke. My face reflected off the monitor in weak blue, eyes raw from sleeplessness. It felt unreal that the one other voice willing to name the pulse would withdraw. They apologized then, voice faltering before returning, clipped once more. They asked me not to call, not to write, not to try at all. I pressed my mouth dry, wanting to explain how alone without them felt unlivable. But static cut across, breaking their words into stutter. When line cleared again, they had hung up. Hours later, an email arrived. At first the subject read normal, their initials. But when I opened it, disorientation swept my eyes. The message body held only slurred characters, half phrases rewriting themselves each time the cursor blinked. And behind the distortion was audio. I clicked play despite trembling hand. What spilled out wasn't message. It was them, or pieces of them, looped and bent. Fragments of their voice layered endlessly back into itself, syllables repeated until they dissolved into moan, vowel scraping against vowel. Every sentence they had started, words they had spoken, returned carved into nonsense and stacked into choking chorus. It was like hearing memory multiply wrong until no origin remained. My chest tightened as dread cut through. Sound had erased them, as if their presence had been folded into static until the only thing left was residue. I tried again, replayed, tried filters, equalizers. None cleaned the corruption. Each layer reached deeper, reshaping their voice into something no longer theirs, into something emptied of self. For hours I sat surrounded by reels and discs half corrupted. My only ally dissolved into phantom echoes, leaving me alone with nothing but polluted evidence and shadows of voices lost. I pressed forehead to desk, feeling wood dig into skin. I thought of how this began, the faint cadence in rainfall that sounded like a lost loved one. It had started with longing, with a voice once real. Now it ended with living voices dissolving into hiss. The cycle mocked me. From grief into proof, and from proof into erasure. The line is cruel. I could not stop imagining their family, their presence inside a home. Did they still speak with clarity there? Or had static already scraped their words, stolen tone even from those closest to them? To me, sound became a predator. It had swallowed them. I feared it could swallow all of us in time. The isolation cut deep. My notebooks felt heavier than before. Every scribbled graph pressed weight against me, reminding me I now bore every trace of record alone. But weight also carved something sharper than despair. A resolve edged in iron, because isolation meant the responsibility no longer divided. It rested only on my hands, and hands burdened with record cannot afford collapse. That insight threatened madness, yet some coil inside me steeled. I thought of turning everything off, of letting reels burn, gutting machines until they could never speak again. But stopping felt like complicity. Stopping let erasure win. If the technician's voice had been scrubbed clean, then mine needed to resist. So I sat among corrupted fragments, hearing their loops droning faint in the background, and steeled myself. I whispered into the hum, I will not vanish. The vow shook, but it lived. The room echoed with that sound, empty but for rain soft against window glass. It carried no reply. But silence too holds weight. Silence can harden into commitment. I am alone. I know it now. No colleagues, no networks, no shield of shared burden. Alone with rain, alone with hiss. Alone with reels and fragments others won't admit exist. And still, I will keep cataloging. Alone, yes. But unbroken, at least until erasure cuts me out too. Because sometimes isolation is not only prison, it is forge. The path forward narrows, darkens, but also sharpens, and I will walk it, step by step, until the spectrum itself closes teeth around me. I thought I had grown familiar with the patterns, the pulses that bent and broke under rain. But the more I carved those signals apart in the spectrogram, the more they bent back toward me. One evening, exhausted but stubborn, I fed a series of reels into the processor and slowed them past recognition. Drops stretched into bass rumbles, hiss spread wide until silence itself became sound. That was when I heard it, faint and impossible, not rain, not static. A shape of voice threaded underneath. I replayed it, tightening filters, stripping frequencies away until bare fragments clung together. And there it was again, with no room left for denial. My own childhood laugh. The short burst I remembered from tape cassettes now long destroyed. A precise copy hidden under rainfall. I froze, hands hovering empty above controls. None of those family tapes had been digitized. They had not existed in any file or disc to be stolen. They had been lost with time, eaten by mold, forgotten. And yet the laughter rang here, replayed in fresh reels discovered decades later. I pressed forward, stunned heart buckling through layers. 10 minutes later came another intrusion. A click and then the flat beep of a family answering machine, one I had not heard in nearly 20 years. The tone sang clear, followed by mother's voice bending a greeting, the cadence exactly as it had once traveled through the house. I closed my eyes against the sharp pull of grief. It shouldn't be possible. These were household ghosts re-engineered into rainfall recordings. The hours blurred into morning. One after another surfaced. The scrape of a chair against the kitchen floor. The warble of a toy piano my brother once smashed. Even the cough that accompanied my father's laughter when smoke clung too deep in his lungs. All of them exactly how memory stored them, but sharper, fresher, intertwined in harmonics blooming from rain's spine. I staggered from the desk, chest burning, yet returned again compelled. Each reel surrendered another shard until I realized the horror overtaking me. The pulses were not just communication. They were archives, feeding pieces of me back. Whether mimicry performed at unholy precision or access to some memory vault beyond physical reach, it no longer mattered. The theft was intimate. It was spiritual intrusion. Grief bent me forward over the spools. My throat locked, small sounds rising without release. Was this kindness? A mercy disguised as crime? My mother's voice alive again, my lost laugh rising from storms? For brief slivers, I wanted to believe it was gift. But every pulse felt barbed. These weren't simple echoes, they were stolen, taken from memory not meant for audience. To hear myself and family returned inside noise turned the air invasive. like someone walking through locked rooms while I slept. The analysis confirmed a deeper fear. Interval alignment suggested deliberate tampering, coded insertion at specific frequencies that human devices only barely caught. These weren't accidents of coincidence. They had been planted, injected into storms to play when summoned by attention. I tried to speak my reaction aloud into the recorder, but the words faltered, breaking like glass in my throat. I am not sure my voice belonged to me anymore either. Every syllable, once spoken, risked capture, grafted into pulse for return at some later date. Perhaps nothing spoken was safe. Still I kept listening. One reel, brittle and barely intact, carried faint laughter. Not my brother this time. It was the lost one, the voice that had haunted storms from the beginning. Low, warm, breaking at its edges into a softness I had not allowed myself to dream of again. For years I had been chasing its ghost. Now it arrived plainly inside hiss and rain, undeniable. I pressed the headphones into my ears until pain throbbed, unwilling to relinquish the fragment, though it cut me raw. The questions curdled. Was this archive drawn from an impossible reservoir all humans fed, some invisible bank of memory hidden in air? Or was it mimic crafted for me, deception sculpted intimate enough to pierce? Both terrified. Archive meant everything we lived was being siphoned away. Mimic meant something was watching closely enough to mold and replay at surgical precision. Either choice meant theft of private self beyond any consent. Hand shaking, I tried one final pass, desperate for different proof. That was when the pulse paused in a way I had never charted before. Silence perforated the reel until one shape broke out, clearer than anything prior. My own voice, young, the version of me not yet bent by desperation. I heard myself call into the rain, into nothing. A question I knew had never been taped, never shared. The sound nearly ended me. I heard it clean, impossibly preserved. The younger me calling out, trembling, asking why the rain spoke. A question not recorded by any hand, only thought, only lived. Now pulled forward decades later, pronounced into the room as though waiting to be answered. And then, through the static, came reply. Not with clarity, but with certainty. A shifted pulse, rising and falling in cadence to acknowledge marking proof I could no longer shun. I bent forward, hands against my trembling face, realizing memory itself was now inside their grasp. It began gradually, until the shift was too complete to ignore. At first a few pages refused to load, spinning endlessly before resolving into error. I assumed it was my connection, reset the router, reset the modem, swept through cables in the dark. But the errors spread wider. Entire domains cleared out, erasing headlines and collapsing archives into bare shells. Then the pattern grew stranger. Not error codes, not frozen warnings. Every site resolved into the same thing, a black screen and the soft hiss of rain. Not video. Not a player I could pause. Just endless audio buried inside dark void, the shape of rain loops unbroken. I tried newswires, government reports, research institutions. Black screens greeted me each time. Academic journals, buying platforms, even the obscure mirrors people once used for conspiracy chatter. All wiped clean, replaced with uniform flood. I checked terminals of others I trusted in, faint networks still alive. A few residual chat boards, already half rotting, confirmed the failure. Users scattered across continents experienced the same thing, their net gone hollow, filled only by rainfall hiss playing out through silence. They typed in disbelief, brief bursts before channels themselves dimmed down to dark. The implications clawed across me. For years the idea of a dead internet had hovered around like smudge. People claiming most of what we saw was bot chatter, synthetic ghosts occupying space. I had mocked it, considered it diversion. And yet here the theory bent back, sharper than metaphor, no longer joke. Not imitation of human life, but replacement of all signals with the lattice of rain-dot pages I had trusted for proof simply dissolved. Where once archives had given me things to cross-reference, nothing remained. Whole chains vanished like cliffs eroded under wave. It was not deletion at the surface. It was systemic overwrite. Rainfall filling the empty frame of every address, presence swallowing structure until nothing else lived there. This collapse changed what the hum was. It was occupation now, not anomaly. It occupied lines, pages, screens. The flood no longer background between voices, it was voice itself. I sat hunched before black screens whispering rain. Tapes stacked high around me. Hands trembled anger more than fear. For weeks I had fought erasure by clinging to offline reels, suspecting they could outlast digital tricks. Now reels weren't simply protection, they were last ground. The net as memory ended that week. Only iron spindles resisted invasion. I pressed play on one, desperate for anchor. The hiss met me raw, rain again, but layered with subtle pulses I already knew. Strange comfort arrived in return of anomaly. It meant something still refused total disappearance. The reels were not infected, not yet. Still, isolation clamped hard. My notes, my evidence, what did they matter if outside world had been leveled into endless rainfall? Who could they reach? Who could compare logs, test, confirm? The skeptic's nightmare was real. Discovery sliding into echo chamber until only the discoverer remained, pitied or erased. Despair grew thick. I thought again of burning everything, of surrender. If memory itself had been pulled into mimics, if networks shrank to nothing but hissing loops, what was left to fight? My body ached, mind raw, but despair twisted against anger, and anger sharpened into resolve. Independence trapped in analog might mean futility, yet also freedom. Tapes could still be touched, spindles still wound, playback still carved sound air no one could rewrite from a distance. Offline, at least, something still resisted. And that something could be me. So I stacked reels into tins, each numbered and marked. Isolation had stripped choice away, but left one brutal option clear. I could confront this thing, trace it on my own, seek its heart through storms yet to come, or dissolve inside withered networks like everyone else. Either survive in opposition or vanish quietly, subsumed into rainfall echoes. The world shrinks now. The window above my desk looks onto dim streets where routers and houses hum pointlessly against rain. Dead air covers their screens. Only I sit with reels, still whispering irregularities. Only I sift voices out of drops that wish to fill silence entirely. I do not know if it is courage or foolishness, but I know this much. I will not dissolve. If confrontation is all that remains, I choose to step forward into the hiss, burdened by tapes alone. Human voice resisting inside a storm bent on occupation. I planned this experiment like someone planning a heist, marking every step under dim lamplight, rehearsing contingencies. I wanted control this time, no excuses of chance or coincidence. The forecast promised a storm heavy enough to mask, and I packed analog recorders, 4 of them, spooled fresh reels, batteries checked twice. By dusk I drove toward the city edge, to places far enough apart to test coordination, but close enough that I could collect them in one sweep before dawn. One recorder I placed near the underpass leading into the freight yards. Another I hid beneath a half-collapsed billboard along the ring road. The third I set against the chain-linked fence behind a closed filling station. The fourth I left in the trunk, my own control unit. Each one armed with fresh spools, each ticking against flooding sky. I logged placement in meticulous notes, clutching the pen tight so rain would not smear lead into gray fog dot. When thunder eased in I felt the air tense, a hum rolling through soil even before drops struck. I set all units spinning, whispered the time into microphones so later alignment could be exact. The first hour held only heavy drops slamming concrete, tires spitting water along empty stretches. I waited, cold crawling up spine. Then the spikes arrived. Identical sharp, not variation but mirrors. Every reel marked the same moment, same pulse carrying inside rain. Separated by miles, still synchronized. I checked notes twice, thrice, disbelieving. The pattern was not scattered noise. It was global inside local. It collapsed distance until all points became one point. Later, back at the desk, I assembled feeds. The identical pulses laid over each other locked like teeth in a gear. Precision clean. There was no weather that consistent. This was intent. The fear grew heavier than wonder. Spectrograms flared as I forced analysis through every filter at hand. The pulses stacked into shape, not random jagged but geometric. Lines, corners, repeating arcs floor plan like drafts climbing from audio into architecture. It felt obscene to watch structure bleed from storm. I traced them manually, pencil scratching outlines on graph paper. The diagrams grew brick by brick with each loop of rain. Corridors, chambered spaces, arches bent upon one another. They weren't instructions for a building, at least not in any material sense. They were ideas poured into human machines, shapes fed through ears and hands, pressing design into flesh and circuit alike, and yet something uncanny broke clarity. When full pattern revealed, it offered not structures made for entry, but traps. Loops leading back into themselves, doors spiraling into copies, corridors ending at their start. Endless return with no center, maps without exits. I stared long, heart pounding against ribs. The signal was not simply communication, it was construction. Not houses, not shelters, prisons, where walls repeat forever you cannot escape. The architecture inside spectrograms was the architecture of imprisonment. A tremor stiffened my hands. The thought scratched over and over. These designs were not meant to be built with stone. They were meant to be built into us. Every time we recorded, every time sound converted into graphs in print, every outline walked itself deeper into the world through us. Recording was no longer neutral act. It was collaboration. Despair shot cold through chest. The first anomaly I heard had been subtle enough to dismiss, a hum beneath rainfall. Now the proof was undeniable, terrifying in how open it was once filtered correctly. Evidence delivered with brazen confidence, brick by brick. I looked around my room. Strips of paper with diagrams pinned to boards surrounded me. Shapes rendered by storm, captured by microphones, traced by my hand. My room had transformed itself into a holding cell of the very thing I fought to expose. Part of me wanted to rip them down, strike fire, burn every reel. Another part whispered it was too late. Once seen, never unseen. Once drawn, impossible to erase. These corridors already existed in me. My brain walked them even now, searching for exits that diagrams never allowed. The storm outside softened past midnight, leaving hush heavy and sodden. But the sound remained in chest, pulses echoing beneath ribs as if body itself had been retuned into its lattice. Entry signal, I scrawled into notebook with hand rigid, letters jagged like broken teeth. Because that is what it was, a key pressed into doors we never asked to open. Fear thickened further when I replayed once more. Past familiar arcs, new designs surfaced faint, spiraling downward. I traced and traced again until pattern resolved as duplicate. Another loop feeding back into first. Hall upon hall stacked into recursion. Proof it could build infinitely. Scaling confinement not for one cell, but for a labyrinth beyond comprehension. I sat back, skin clammy with sweat, though window was cold. Breath scraped shallow as realization finished coiling. We are not bystanders recording intrusion. We are blueprint bearers. Every tape is brick. Every graph doorway. By preserving evidence we replicate cage. It left choice hanging sharp in throat. To continue means to build further. But to stop now means blindness. Neither path frees. Outside, rain returned faint, tapping a regular, almost mocking knock against glass. I looked at outlines pinned across walls and whispered to empty room what I already knew. There was no escape map here. Only entry. Only endless halls circling back. And the cliff dropped sharper in that thought. The structures drawn were built not to keep something out, but to keep us in. I carried the diagrams with me. Sheets folded, creased soft at edges from too much handling. Each time I traced them, I felt a twitch in my chest, a pull west toward the industrial quarter that had long stood condemned. Rows of warehouses, rusted skylines, corrugated teeth gnawed down by time. It matched the angles on my paper. No one patrolled there, no light but what the sky granted. I parked along the fence line and slipped inside. The air smelled of dust and stale oil. Puddles crusted in cracked cement reflected slivers of weak moonlight. Each footfall echoed deeper than walls should allow. I pulled my recorder out, small unit blinking as the reel began to spin. Background hiss folded into air until it became hard to know where device ended and building began. Rooms stretched in series, near identical. Square, windowless, their surfaces sweating faint static the way water beads glass. I tested echoes with a whistle, but the sound returned slow, warped, a lag too long to match dimensions. I checked my diagrams. Corridors bent on paper, exactly as feet bent in real. I walked forward, yet somehow found myself re-entering the room I had left moments before. I paused, pulse hammering faster than breath. Marked chalk on wall, stepped through the door again, determined not to trick myself. Same result, chalk staring back, mocking. Space looped, mocking diagrams no longer ink, but architecture in steel and concrete. A staircase clawed upward near the rear. Relief swept in, because vertical meant change. I gripped the rails, climbed. Steps felt endless, dim industrial light nesting shadows. Yet when lungs burned, I noticed something wrong. I had returned to the base again, standing at the bottom though legs ached as if climbed. Recorder confirmed reel still turning, seconds eaten, but stairs feeding nowhere. Panic scraped in bone. I hurried through different corridors, left, right, random choices. Each turn bent in recursion. The walls hummed faint, like amplified tape hiss, low and constant. My flashlight beam wavered through dust and silence, catching rusted fixtures repeating in grotesque familiarity. Time shifted strangely too. Watch on my wrist ticked, yet the shadows lengthened and shrank without logic. I checked the recorder timer. It told me 20 minutes had passed. My body felt hours. Breath became ragged, mind fraying as I circled rooms I no longer trusted as real. I had walked into the lattice born from spectrograms, and it held me like an ant inside glass maze. Voices teased the edges then. No clarity, only shapes of words bent under static swell. Sometimes my name, sometimes lost syllable half-formed. I froze, skin icy with sweat, ear pressed against wall as faint breathing responded when I did. Echoes no longer just bounce of sound but mimic of body. I stumbled forward then, searching any exit. Doors multiplied, yet each open to repetition, stair to same base, hall to hall, loop to loop. My chest flooded with certainty. This space was not abandoned. It was alive. A place constructed not for work, but for containment. Signal had become door, and door had become prison. Recorder still spun in hand, tape swallowing my panic. I spoke into it desperately just to tether myself. A log of steps loops, the echo breathing back. My voice trembled. Listening later would mean proof, but if I failed to leave it, would be the only trace of me at all. I don't know how long I wandered. Sweat chilled beneath jacket. Brain rinned with noise. At some point I ran, feet hammering metal, refusing sense, until at last door swung wide to open night. Rain slid through broken rooftop and the sky returned. I collapsed under it, lungs pulling cold damp until throat burned. Behind me, building sat ordinary, mute. No glow, no hum. Only derelict shell, yet the tape reels prove what I lived. Played back, they carry stair loops, time fractures, echoes responding faint at my own breath. Geography transformed into audio, audio into geography. The boundary gone. The terror in me now is deeper than evidence on graph or reel. Because the signal has stepped through. The thing once confined to tape has teeth in stone and metal, reshaping walls to swallow. And when I fled, exhaustion heavier than body, I knew one certainty lodged sick under ribs. It had wanted me inside. The entrance was nothing more than a rusted drain mouth along the side of the flood channel. I crawled down alone, knees slick with mud, recorder bag slung across my back. The air inside carried the weight of rot, metal damp, and something sharper, like struck circuitry. I lowered microphones into the dark, coils unspooling steady as I stepped deeper. Water dripped from overhead, drops echoing in hollow arc. Those echoes didn't fade naturally. They bent, ricocheted with modulation, as though each drop dragged extra voices out of stone. The tunnel sloped, narrower at first, then splitting wide into chamber. I lit lamp against my chest. Its glimmer revealed vast space alive with sound. Cavern walls glistened with sweating condensation. Every drip multiplied thousands of times, each repetition warped, layered into overlapping pulse the way rain tapes carried voices not meant to exist. I crouched, headphones swallowing skull. My own footsteps rang back as phrases, syllables bent wrong, each return not echo but mimic. The hairs along my arm lifted stiff. The idea struck that this was something more than geology. This was archive. A storehouse hollowed beneath city where rainfall itself deposited memory. Voices swam inside the reverberations. A laugh barked against wall, not mine, not now, but recognizably lived by someone somewhere else, perhaps long gone. An argument flickered next to tones slashing, then merging into hiss. Every layer played at once. 1,000 past storms braided into single present. For minutes I could not move, stunned by sheer density. It was less like standing in a cavern and more like waiting inside decades at once, but awe curdled into dread. Because as I listened harder, I realized nothing here was preserved whole. The fragments did not play memory straight. They were shredded, reassembled in jagged loops, voices of the forgotten bent until unrecognizable, then restapled inside pulse. This was no storage chamber. It was consumption, absorption. People thinned to patterns, reduced to teeth on spectrum graphs, fed forward into machinery deeper still. My chest shook. I whispered into recorder log what I heard, my voice trembling. At once it layered back to me, stretched slow, dropping an octave. My words stretched beyond shape before vanishing into roar. The cavern had devoured my voice as soon as I offered it. I paced forward, light jittering. The cavern had no clear floor, only expanding corridors sloping further beneath. Each wall pulsed soundscape thicker, surging low like organs groaning under strain. And in those pulses I sensed force. Not accident, will. The archive below was not passive vault. It was active feed, taking whatever dripped into it, stripping names, reshaping breath. The pressure intensified. My gear flickered, meters freezing then spiking red. Batteries bled faster than clock should allow. The pulse surged around me until ribs ached with resonance. Breath shallow, throat closed. My light dimmed, wavered, then returned dimmer still. I turned to climb back, panic hammering. Reels continued spinning in chamber, refusing stop, machines running even after I pulled batteries free. Their ticks slipped from my control, feeding audio into earth like veins into creature. I forced myself away, back through low tunnel, bag heavy but heart heavier. Behind me the tape reels kept turning, as though recording for someone who would never arrive. As though siphoning layers deeper, messages passed underground where light never touches, feeding memory into more silence, more rewrite. I broke surface gasping, night rain striking face sharp like warning. Recorder still in hand. Evidence captured, but part of me left. Because I knew the archive below did not store us. It swallowed us. And some part of me was still turning with those reels in that cavern, feeding sound deeper than anyone would ever trace. The storm rose without horizon. At dusk, clouds cemented the sky, packed thick and burning with flashes that never spilled thunder. By night, torrents fell so fierce the gutters became rivers, water clawing past curb lines in silver sheets. I set the recorder on windowsill, reel hunched ready, microphone wrapped in cloth. Within seconds, the storm drowned out itself, roar beyond roar. Layers stacked until one massive body of water pressed against everything. Radios burst alive without touch. Emergency bands shrieked, clipping before devolving into hiss. I turned dial after dial, only to meet the same end channel saturated. Identical pulses hammering through rain and lightning. Voices squeezed upward, each overlapping an unnatural chorus. Too many to separate. Mothers, children, newsreaders, beggars, priests, lovers, all tones stacked together, crowd without border. The world had emptied its throat. For the first time the entity spoke clearly. Not through fragments, not hidden in drips or spectrogram outlines. It came as total flood, every voice I had ever heard and every voice I had not, fused into impossible choir. Each syllable stuttered unique, but they layered into continuous tide. No language alone, but many together, blending until meaning bent under weight. Personal devices obeyed the flood. Phone lit, then bled to black screen, returning rainwave as hum inside speaker. Laptop glowed raven dark, monitor blank, fan cycling only to push out rainfall audio cast through grid. Even the small weather radio I kept under bed exploded into static that pulsed with cadence too regular for chance. That it grew unbearable, yet I couldn't step away. Recorders spun, tape swallowing collapse in real time. I scribbled notes jagged by shaking hand, all channels identical, all voices. Tears blurred graphite. The terror was intimate. Each voice inside the multitude brushed me close, too close. I recognized friend long dead, teacher from childhood, father coughing again, as he once did after smoke. Then stranger voices joined, tones belonging to no one I knew, yet pressing against me as familiarly as breath. The storm carried world's memory, unfiltered, dam burst across sky. Cosmic, yet personal. Nearly holy, nearly cruel. Questions clawed in me. Were these archives spilling open, or inventions designed to mimic? Did the entity release the weight of consumed lives in this torrent, or did it fabricate new lives for me to drown in? Either choice pressed bone to cracking. Machinery failed under flood. Record lights flickered, humming until bulbs died with sickly pop. Receivers blurted sparks, then fell mute, coils seared acrid. The room smelled of ozone, wires smoking, threads thin but bitter. My heart panicked at thought of losing all, but one recorder clung on, older, portable, resilient against collapse. Metal heavy, gears grinding, microphone wet as rain pooled down sill. My hands wrapped around it like reliquary, thumb wiping water, but failing. Each drop struck diaphragm, merging hiss into storm until distinction blurred fully away. I pressed close, speaking into it though voice shook. My words joined chorus already pressing from outside, my voice eaten faster than tape could spin. And still I spoke, desperate oath that if anything human remained it would hold here. The storm did not ease. It thickened, horizonless and merciless. Windows flexed, walls shivered. Every second layered more voices until thought itself bent, neurons too flooded by echo to process. I staggered, knees buckling. One question roared in skull, louder than thunder above. If this signal erases, then what remains of self? When memory dissolves to chorus, when voices peel away identity until all are one and none, what is left to name as me? The rain pressed harder, recorder dripping, my body trembling. My notes sprawled into lines unreadable. Yet reel still turned, capturing end or beginning. I could not say dot, and with each thud of rain overhead, I whispered the question again, a plea now. What remains when self is nothing but rain on tape? Rain hasn't stopped in days. It doesn't even sound like real weather anymore. The drops strike steady, identical, as if copied and replayed against glass. Streets blur into rivers. Gutters sing metallic. And all my machines, whether switched on or silent, pulse with it. Speakers hum, screen edges flicker, even the old desk lamp buzzes faint rainfall hiss. The room itself has become an echo chamber where no surface can keep quiet. I am speaking now, though I'm not sure to whom. Or to what? This reel spins, its soft clatter familiar, but I don't know if what it captures is testimony, or dream, or intrusion dressing itself in my voice. Perhaps all are the same now. My words may already be folded back into lattice before tape even holds ink. Outside institutions still release no statement. Maybe they never will. Weather service lines collapsed long ago. Labs do not answer. Those who sent fragments with me have vanished, bleached, their names eaten through letters like film left in chemicals too long. Loved ones too drawn away until only scraps of sound remain. I strain at silence some nights, desperate for return, only to meet faint syllables broken under rain's cadence. Familiar timbres no longer whole, laughter thinned until it perforates. Memory porous. Nothing remains sealed. I can no longer separate dream from recording. The diagrams I traced onto wall are indistinguishable from floor plans I walked in nightmares. At times I wake sitting at desk, reels spinning though I never pressed play. My notebooks contain pages I do not remember writing, handwriting still mine but words bent, spirals repeating. Some nights even this voice betrays me, sentences slipping ahead of thought as if dictated by another. Yet the rain persists, constant, endless, pounding but steady. The hum beneath has grown stronger too, no longer lurking. It lives in marrow, in bone. A tone so low, I feel jaw ache when I try not to hear. If I shut ears, it still arrives, pulsed inside skull. It is undeniable, the only certainty I have left. I think of when this began. A black screen with rain, a tape left nameless, a hum that should not exist, but did. Now everything is black screen. Every machine yields the same emptiness, flooding hiss beyond shutdown. The world reduced to water and pulse. I try to imagine what people who don't record experience. Perhaps they no longer exist at all. Perhaps they dissolved back into the sound where I hear fragments of them repeat. The choice now rests small but absolute. To stop the tape or let it run. To hold silence in palms, acknowledging all erasure, or to push forward, letting reel spool without end. Each outcome feels binding. If I stop, maybe I preserve myself, draw definite border against theft. But stopping means silence will swallow, proof gone. And if I let it spin, I risk merging with it until no distinction stands. Identity dripped back into hiss, looped endlessly forward. I stand here at edge, reel spinning, rain pressing harder through walls. Every detail of this moment feels sharpened, daring me. This hiss is heartbeat now. I don't know if you will hear me, or if this is my voice at all. But know this much. I have pressed play across storms, until tapes stack high. And all I know anymore is rainfall, endless, stitched with hum alive beneath it. The world and I and memory pressed flat into repeating pulse. What remains now is undecided. The reel still spools. My hand hovers inches above the switch. To stop or to let it run forever. Rain hits tape hiss, constant. The choice is unresolved, waiting for whichever listener dares decide whether to press play again. Or not.